Ava, I can't marry you. Those 5 words destroyed everything I had ever believed about love. The phone slipped from my hand before I could even respond. For a second, I didn't understand what I'd just heard. My reflection in the mirror, white dress, pearls, and carefully curled hair, stared back at me like a stranger downstairs. I could still hear the music playing softly. My mother humming as she arranged flowers for the reception. My father's voice drifted up the stairs, calm, steady, reassuring. Everything was perfect. Everything was supposed to be perfect, and then, just like that, it wasn't. I picked up the phone again, pressing it to my ear. Dylan. My voice came out cracked, trembling. This isn't funny. But the only thing I heard was a long, unbroken silence, and then, click. The call ended, the world stopped. It's strange how heartbreak has sound. For me, it was the clatter of the phone hitting the hardwood floor, the rush of blood in my ears, the sharp gasp that escaped my mother when she appeared at the door. Ava? What's wrong? I couldn't speak. My lips moved, but no sound came out. My mother's face went pale as she looked from the fallen phone to my shaking hands. She didn't need an answer. Mothers never do. Her scream shattered the quiet. My father came running, confusion written all over his face. Then realization hit, and he turned away, pressing a hand against his mouth. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Somewhere in the background, my maid of honor tried to comfort me, but her voice was muffled, far away. The air in the room thickened, as if it didn't want to let me breathe. The bouquet on the dresser, white lilies and pale roses, tipped over, scattering petals across the floor. They looked like small pieces of me, falling apart. I remember walking to the window. Outside, Charleston shone bright and golden under the morning sun. The world looked cruelly beautiful, like it hadn't noticed my life collapsing. I could hear guests arriving at the church down the street. Laughter. Car doors. Music. Life moving on. Indifferent to mine, somewhere between my mother's sobs and my father's silence. I realized staying in that house would suffocate me. So I picked up my shoes, held the skirt of my wedding dress, and walked out the door. The air outside hit me like cold water. My heels clicked against the cobblestone as I walked, barely seeing, barely thinking. People turned to stare. One woman gasped. A little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, why is the bride crying?" The question almost broke me. I didn't even know where I was going. I just walked. Past the church where my vows were supposed to echo. Past the harbor where Dylan first told me he loved me. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at it. I stopped at the pier. The same place where he had once slipped a ring onto my finger and promised. Forever, Ava. Forever had lasted 3 years. 11 months, and 16 days. The water glittered under the sun, mocking me with its calmness. I wanted to scream, to throw the ring into the sea. But I didn't. I just stared at the horizon until my eyes blurred with tears. Then I turned and kept walking. The city faded behind me, replaced by the sound of waves crashing and seagulls crying overhead. I found myself at the bus station, surrounded by strangers and suitcases and the hum of engines. The clerk at the counter looked me up and down, my dress wrinkled, my mascara smudged, my veil half torn, and hesitated before asking, "Where to, miss?" I didn't think. I just said the first place that came to mind. Willow Harbor. The words tasted like escape. She handed me a ticket. I gave her the ring in return. It was all I had in my hand. She stared at it, confused, but I didn't care. I boarded the bus barefoot, the hem of my gown dragging against the dusty steps. As the bus pulled away from the city, I pressed my forehead against the window and tried to breathe. Charleston disappeared slowly, its skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was just a blur of color and memory. Then, as we turned past a small park, I saw them, a bride and groom standing under an oak tree, laughing as a photographer circled them. The bride's veil blew in the wind, the groom reached to catch it, and they kissed, their laughter carried away by the breeze. It was beautiful. Painfully beautiful. My heart clenched. For a second, jealousy burned hot in my chest, then faded, replaced by something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. Or the faint realization that the world didn't know me. Stillness just because I was broken. The bus rattled on, the sunlight flickering through the trees. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, pale, tired, mascara streaked like war paint. But behind the exhaustion, I saw something else, the faintest trace of a woman who might survive this. When the bus crossed the bridge and the ocean opened beneath us, I whispered to myself, barely audible over the roar of the engine, "You're not done yet." The words trembled. Fragile but alive. I didn't know what waited for me in Willow Harbor, only that it had to be something different. Something that didn't hurt this way. The bus rolled on into the horizon, carrying me away from the wreckage of a wedding that never happened and toward the quiet unknown. And as the sunlight flickered through the window, I finally let the tears fall, each one a tiny, shimmering piece of the woman I was leaving behind. The bus rolled into Willow Harbor just after sunset. The sky was painted in soft shades of gold and violet, the lake glimmering like a sheet of glass. When I stepped down, the air felt different, quieter, cooler. Carrying the scent of pine and bread from some faraway kitchen, I stood there for a moment with my single suitcase. Still wearing the remnants of my wedding dress beneath a borrowed coat from a kind woman on the bus. The lace peeked out at the hem, dirt-stained and wrinkled, a ghost of the life I'd left behind. Ava Brooks, a voice called out sharply. I turned. There she was, my aunt, Marianne Foster. Same short auburn hair, same piercing gray eyes, same impatient posture. Time hadn't softened her one bit. You look like hell, she said matter-of-factly, pulling me into a quick, awkward hug. I feel worse, I muttered. She pulled back, studying me. Good. Feeling bad means you're still alive. Come on. That was Marianne, no pity, no gentle sympathy. Just brisk motion and blunt truth. Her truck smelled like lavender soap and motor oil. She drove fast, barely saying a word. The trees outside blurred past, and for a while, the silence felt like a mercy. Then, halfway through town, she spoke. So, the runaway bride of Charleston, huh? I saw it on Facebook. I winced. Of course you did. Don't worry, she said dryly. People forget fast. Last week it was a man who got chased by his own goats on Main Street. You'll be old news by Monday. I couldn't tell if she was trying to comfort me or tease me. Maybe both. When we reached her house, she parked but didn't get out. Instead, she turned to me with that sharp gaze of hers. You can stay here for a few days, but I'm not running a pity motel. If you're staying longer, you'll find something useful to do. I nodded, unable to argue. I understand. She smirked. Good. Tomorrow morning, I'll show you a place that needs a bit of life back in it. Morning came with pale light streaming through lace curtains. The sound of gulls echoed faintly over the lake. I found Marianne already dressed, sipping coffee on the porch. 2 mugs waiting. Drink, she said, handing me one. You look like you need caffeine more than oxygen. I managed a small smile. Where are we going? To a place that used to mean something, she said. Come on. We drove toward the edge of town, past rows of cottages with faded shutters and gardens in bloom. Then, the truck stopped in front of a small, abandoned brick building with a crooked wooden sign that read in peeling paint, Sunrise Oven. The windows were fogged with dust, the door hanging slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old flour and thyme. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and sunlight filtered through in golden beams. This was Eloise Carter's bakery, Marianne said, leaning against the doorframe. Back when I was your age, this place was the heart of Willow Harbor. She closed it after her husband died, never opened again. I stepped inside, tracing my fingers along the dusty counter. There were still old recipe cards stacked in a tin box, yellowed with age. An empty rolling pin sat beside a rusted oven. Something about the space felt sacred. Sad, but sacred. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Marianne shrugged. You said you needed somewhere to stay. I say you need something to do. If you're going to cry, at least sweep while you do it. Her words should have stung, but instead, I laughed, the first real laugh since that morning in Charleston. You're unbelievable. Yeah, but I'm right, she said, tossing me a rag. Start cleaning. You might just find something worth keeping. When she left, the silence of the bakery wrapped around me. I stared at the dust floating through the sunlight, the faint echo of laughter that seemed trapped in the walls. Slowly, I began to move, sweeping, dusting, scrubbing every corner. It was exhausting. My arms ached, my dress clung to me with sweat and flour. But for the first time in days, my mind quieted. I wasn't thinking about Dylan. I wasn't replaying that phone call. I was just moving forward, inch by inch. By evening, I collapsed onto the floor, covered in dust but smiling faintly. That's when I saw it, a small envelope wedged between 2 floorboards near the counter. I pried it out carefully. The paper was fragile, yellowed with age. Inside was a single card, handwritten in elegant cursive. Every loaf tells a story. The ink was faded but clear enough to read. I traced the words with my fingertip, feeling something stir inside me, a warmth. A strange flicker of hope. I didn't know what the story of my life would become. But for the first time, I wanted to find out. When I stood, the evening sun was spilling through the window, painting the room gold. My reflection in the glass caught my attention, tired eyes, messy hair, and the faint scar on my wrist from a baking accident years ago. I remembered my mother laughing that day as I cried over a burnt pie crust. It's okay, sweetheart, she had said. Every baker burns something before they make something worth eating. I smiled at the memory, brushing the dust from my hands. Maybe this was the start of something worth making. Outside, the lake shimmered under the setting sun. I stepped into the doorway and whispered softly to the empty air, every loaf tells a story. Maybe it's time I start baking mine. For the first few mornings in Willow Harbor, I woke before dawn, not because I wanted to, but because the silence wouldn't let me sleep. The air in the bakery was always cold, carrying the faint smell of yeast and dust. I started cleaning more, scrubbing every inch of the counters. trying to erase the ghosts of everything I'd lost. One afternoon, a customer wandered in, a man in his 60s wearing suspenders and a fishing cap. He leaned on the doorframe and said, "Didn't think I'd ever see Sunrise Oven open again." "It's not open," I said quickly, brushing my hands on my jeans. "Just cleaning." He smiled. Eloise Carter would have liked that. She always said this place needed a good soul to wake it up. "Eloise Carter?" I repeated. "Best baker in Willow Harbor," he said proudly. "Her bread could make a preacher cuss and a sinner pray. Lives out by the lake now. Doesn't take students. Not since her husband passed." That name lingered with me for hours. Eloise Carter. I found myself staring at the faded photograph still pinned on the wall, a woman with silver hair tied up in a bun. Flour dusting her apron, her smile confident and kind. By evening, I made up my mind that Eloise's house sat near the water. A small white cottage surrounded by wild roses and old rocking chairs. When I knocked, the door creaked open, and there she was. The same woman from the photo, only older, sterner. Her sharp blue eyes taking me in from head to toe. "If you're selling cookies?" "I'm diabetic," she said flatly. I swallowed hard. "I'm not here to sell anything. I'm Ava Brooks. I've been cleaning the old bakery, Sunrise Oven. I heard it was yours." Her eyes softened for half a second, then hardened again. "It was? Now it's a tomb. Why are you digging it up?" "I want to bake," I said quietly. "I don't know what else to do anymore." That made her pause. She crossed her arms, the corners of her mouth turning slightly down. "People who bake to escape heartbreak never last. You'll quit by week 2. I shook my head. "Then I'll quit by week 3. That earned me the faintest hint of a smile. But she still closed the door halfway and said, "Come back when you've burned your first loaf. Then we'll talk." The door shut with a final click. The next morning, I found a bag of old flour in the back of the pantry, half hardened with time. Still, I decided to try. I searched through the recipe cards I'd found earlier, picked one that said, "sweet loaf," and began. I followed every step carefully, whispering the instructions under my breath like a prayer. The dough felt wrong, too sticky, too dry, too something. But I kept kneading until my arms trembled. When I finally slid it into the oven, I sat on the floor, staring through the glass as if it could heal me. An hour later, I opened the door to a puff of smoke. The loaf was black, burned beyond recognition, a sad, charred lump. The smell filled the room, sharp and bitter. My throat tightened. It wasn't just the bread that failed. It was me. Again. I sank to my knees and cried, not loud, but deep, like something breaking loose from my chest. I didn't even notice the door open. "You didn't quit," a voice said from behind me. I turned. Eloise stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. Eyes scanning the mess, the flour on my face, the smoke curling toward the ceiling. I thought you didn't take students," I said. Wiping at my tears. "I don't," she replied. Then she stepped closer, picked up the pan, and smirked. "But at least you're burning something real this time." I blinked. "Real?" She nodded. "Heartache, guilt, whatever it is you're trying to bury, it's all in that loaf. Baking doesn't erase pain, sweetheart. It transforms it." Her tone softened. "Come by tomorrow. Early. Bring your apron and leave the crying at home." Then she turned to leave. "Wait," I called after her. "Why me?" She stopped at the doorway, looking out toward the lake where the light was beginning to fade. "Because I see that look in your eyes. I had it once too." The next morning, I showed up at her cottage before sunrise. She already had the oven preheating and 2 aprons laid out. "Lesson 1, she said. "Baking is like grieving. You follow the steps, but something always turns out different. You learn to adjust." Her kitchen was small but alive, jars of spices, old cookbooks with flour-stained pages, the faint scent of cinnamon in the air. She moved like she'd done this for 100 years, her hands steady, her voice both gentle and commanding. At one point, as she shaped the dough, I asked quietly, "Do you ever miss him? Your husband?" She paused, her fingers still pressing into the dough. "Every day," she said simply. "But loss isn't the end, Ava. It's just a new recipe you haven't learned yet." Her words hit me like sunlight through storm clouds, quiet, steady, and impossibly warmed. By the time we finished baking that morning, the air smelled of butter and hope. The loaf wasn't perfect, uneven, slightly overbaked, but when I took the first bite, I smiled through tears. It was the best thing I'd tasted in months. Eloise chuckled softly. "Congratulations. That's your first real loaf." And for the first time since my wedding day, I felt something rise inside me, something stronger than pain. By late summer, the smell of bread had become the heartbeat of Willow Harbor again. Every morning, sunlight spilled through the wide windows of Sunrise Oven, catching dust motes that floated like sugar in the air. People came for miles, fishermen, teachers, even teenagers, all to buy the cinnamon rolls that Eloise and I baked side by side. Sometimes, when I saw the line of customers stretching down the block, I couldn't believe this was the same place that had once been a hollow, dusty shell, or that I was the same girl who'd arrived here in a wedding dress. Too numb to breathe. It was during one of those busy mornings that I met Cole Bennett. He was tall, sun-browned, with kind eyes and a quiet voice that seemed to blend with the smell of roasted coffee beans. He owned Bennett's Roastery, a small coffee farm just a few miles out of town. Morning, he greeted as he stepped inside, carrying 2 burlap sacks slung over his shoulder. Fresh batch. Thought you might like to test a darker roast for your morning bread. Eloise raised an eyebrow. Trying to sell her something, are you? Cole grinned. Trying to make her bread even better. I laughed, the first genuine laugh that had come easily in a long time. He left with a promise to return the next day, and true to his word, he did. Over time, bringing coffee became our small ritual. Sometimes, he stayed to help me stack flour bags or repair the oven door that constantly jammed. He never asked questions about my past, and I never offered answers. We just worked, shoulder to shoulder, in the kind of quiet that didn't feel heavy. Weeks passed. Life was calm, predictable, and almost happy, until that morning when the rain came. The storm rolled in fast, sweeping across the harbor like a curtain of silver. I was arranging loaves on the counter when the bell above the door rang. I looked up, and froze. Dylan, his suit was soaked, his hair clinging to his forehead, eyes red and desperate. For a moment, I couldn't move. The air between us felt thick, charged with memories I thought I'd buried. Ava, he whispered, his voice trembling. I had to see you. The world around me went silent, the customers, the rain, even my own heartbeat. Eloise, who had been in the back, stepped out slowly. Sensing something in the air. What are you doing here? I finally managed. I made a mistake, he said, stepping closer. Leaving you, it was the worst decision of my life. I thought I wasn't ready, that I'd mess things up. But I was wrong. He looked around, his gaze landing on the trays of bread, the sign above the counter, the laughter of people at the tables. You built all this? Yes, I said simply. I can see that you've changed, he murmured. But maybe we could start again? Fix what I broke. Something inside me wanted to cry, not from longing, but from disbelief. Months ago, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now, they felt hollowed out. I looked him in the eye and asked quietly, are you back because you love me? Or because you hate seeing me live without you? His expression faltered. For a long moment, he didn't answer. The rain outside softened to a drizzle. Then there's nothing left to say, I said, my voice steady. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he turned and walked out, leaving a trail of wet footprints on the wooden floor. Eloise stepped forward, her face unreadable. She picked up a towel, wiped the counter slowly, then looked at me. Well, she said, that was something. I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling. I thought I'd fall apart. But I didn't. She smiled softly. That was the first real loaf you ever baked, the kind made of courage. I laughed, though my throat tightened. He looked so small, Eloise. Like the world finally told him no. She nodded. People like him don't realize that love isn't ownership. It's partnership. You've learned that the hard way. That night, after closing the bakery, I sat alone with a cup of Cole's dark roast, watching the rain slide down the windows. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by what I'd lost. Instead, I felt proud, not for rejecting Dylan, but for finally choosing myself. The next morning, Cole came by with his usual quiet smile. Heard you had quite the visitor yesterday, he said lightly. I looked up, surprised. Small town travels fast. Willow Harbor always does, he chuckled. You okay? I nodded. Better than I've been in years. He hesitated, then placed a small paper bag on the counter. Brought you something. Inside was a loaf of coffee bread, rich, warm, and imperfect. Just like the ones I used to burn. Thought you might want to taste something new, he said. I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. Thank you, Cole. He shrugged, his voice gentle. You don't owe anyone your past, Ava. Least of all him. And as he left, I realized something beautiful. The past could knock, but it didn't have a key anymore. The morning after Dylan left felt different. The bakery was quiet, sunlight slanting through the windows, glinting off the copper bowls and jars of sugar. I thought I'd wake up broken, maybe cry again, but instead, I felt light. The air smelled of yeast and roasted coffee, and for the first time in months, I noticed how alive the sound of the oven was, that steady hum. That warmth that filled every corner like a heartbeat. When Cole walked in that afternoon, his boots still dusted with dirt from the coffee fields, I knew he'd heard about what happened. In Willow Harbor, news traveled faster than the tide. He didn't mention Dylan at first. He just placed a burlap sack of beans on the counter and said, You're running low on the medium roast. I smiled. You didn't have to, he shrugged. Didn't want your customers to revolt. They've grown addicted to your cinnamon rolls and my beans. There was that easy warmth again, the kind that didn't demand anything from me. We shared coffee in the corner booth while Eloise arranged loaves on the shelf. After a moment, Cole leaned forward. Can I ask you something? Sure. He hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of his mug. Have you ever thought about expanding? Expanding? I echoed, yeah. Sunrise Oven's got a soul, people love it. But it's small. You've built something worth sharing, Ava. What if we opened a second shop? Coffee and bread, side by side. For a moment, I just stared at him. My stomach twisted, not from fear of failure, but from something deeper. The thought of letting someone else in, I don't know, I said slowly. This place, it's mine. I built it from ashes. I'm not sure I'm ready to rely on anyone again. Cole nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. That's fair. He looked thoughtful for a moment, then met my gaze. I'm not asking you to rely on me. I'm asking you to partner with me. I frowned slightly, unsure. He smiled, soft, sincere. I don't want to save you, Ava. I just want to stand next to you. The words hit something inside me I didn't realize was still bruised. For a long time, I'd been defined by being chosen, then abandoned. Cole wasn't offering rescue, he was offering respect. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of my little apartment above the bakery, watching the harbor lights flicker like stars on the water. My hands still smelled faintly of flour and coffee grounds. Partnership. The word lingered in my mind. Unfamiliar but comforting. At dawn, I walked downstairs, opened the oven, and baked 3 loaves of sourdough. The recipe Eloise had said was too ambitious for heartbreakers. When the first loaf rose perfectly, I smiled. Maybe it was time to be ambitious again. Over the next few weeks, Cole and I worked side by side. We scouted a new location by the lake, an old fisherman's shack with wide windows and a view of the sunrise. He drew sketches, I planned menus. Eloise supervised, pretending not to care but secretly glowing with pride. One afternoon, a local journalist stopped by, camera in hand. Mind if I feature you two for the town column? She asked. Everyone's talking about the new place, the girl who turned heartbreak into bread. Cole chuckled. She's the real story, not me. The article came out a week later, titled, The Woman Who Rose from the Oven. When I read it, my chest tightened. It wasn't about tragedy, it was about strength. About how something beautiful could grow out of something broken. A few days later, I found a letter in the bakery's mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly, delicate, slanted, like lace. It was from Margaret Reed, Dylan's mother. Dear Ava, you probably don't want to hear from me, and I wouldn't blame you. I once thought you weren't good enough for my son. But now I see, you were always too good. You taught him the hardest lesson, that love without respect is nothing. I hope life is kinder to you than we ever were. Margaret. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the recipe book Eloise had given me. Not out of sentiment, but closure. That evening, Cole found me sitting on the bakery steps, watching the harbor turn gold in the fading light. You look like someone who just read something important, he said. I handed him the letter. He read it quietly, then looked at me. You okay? I nodded. Yeah, I think I finally am. He smiled, eyes crinkling. Good. Because tomorrow, I'm showing you the new espresso machine for the lake shop. You're going to hate it. I laughed, a real, bright sound that echoed down the quiet street. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I was choosing people, dreams, and a future that belonged entirely to me. That night, as I closed the bakery, I placed a new sign by the window. Sunrise Oven and Bennett Roastery, coming soon. Underneath it, I scribbled in chalk, rising together. 6 months later, the smell of cinnamon and freshly ground coffee drifted through Willow Harbor like a second sunrise. Sunrise Oven wasn't just a bakery anymore, it was a gathering place. The little bell above the door chimed all day long. Laughter spilled out onto the street, and every morning, someone brought in a story along with their order. Mrs. Eloise sat by the window most mornings, pretending to scold the teenagers who came in just to take pictures of their croissants. Cole ran deliveries back and forth to the new lakeside branch, his truck always smelling of beans and baked sugar. And me, I stood behind the counter, apron dusted with flour, my hands steady, my heart quiet. Sometimes, I'd catch sight of myself in the reflection of the glass case, not the trembling bride who once ran away from her own wedding, but a woman who had built something with her own 2 hands. It was late afternoon when the last rush ended. The crowd thinned, and the sunlight turned honey gold, pooling across the wooden floorboards. Cole came in through the side door, wiping sweat from his brow. You sold out again, he said, glancing at the empty racks. That's the 3rd time this week. I smiled, tying my hair back. That's a good problem to have. He leaned against the counter, watching me wipe down the tables. You ever think about how far you've come? I laughed softly. Every time I burn a batch of cookies, yes. Cole chuckled, then grew quiet. Do you still miss him? For a moment, I didn't answer. The question hung between us, gentle but heavy. I looked out the window. The lake shimmered like glass in the fading sun. Finally, I said, no. I just miss the girl who thought she wasn't enough. Cole nodded slowly. She'd be proud of you. I looked at him, really looked at him, the easy steadiness in his eyes, the warmth that didn't ask for anything in return. Yeah, I whispered. I think she would be. The evening crowd began to arrive, kids chasing each other, couples sharing loaves of bread, an old man reciting poems over coffee. The bakery hummed with life, a rhythm of joy I'd thought I'd lost forever. Eloise called from her table, Ava, you're out of scones again. I told you to make extra. I rolled my eyes, grinning. You also told me not to overwork the dough. She smirked, raising her cup. You finally learned to argue back. That's progress. Laughter filled the room. Cole turned on the lights, and the sign outside glowed softly in the dusk. Sunrise oven, bread, coffee. And stories later, when the shop finally emptied and the moon rose over the harbor, I sat by the window with Cole. The world outside was quiet, save for the gentle sound of waves. He poured me a cup of coffee and said, you know, I used to think warmth came from fire. Turns out, it's made from people. I smiled. You sound like Eloise now. He laughed. Don't tell her that. She'll make me bake. We sat in silence for a while, watching the street lamps flicker. I thought about the journey, the broken phone call, the runaway bride, the burnt loaves, the courage it took to start again. And somehow, every piece fit together. Every pain had led me here, to this piece. As I locked up the bakery, I paused at the door and looked back one last time. The ovens were cooling, the air thick with the scent of sugar and bread. It felt like the heartbeat of a life rebuilt. I turned off the lights, stepped outside, and felt the cool breeze brush my skin. Cole stood beside me, hands in his pockets. The lake shimmered under the stars. He leaned closer and whispered, you did it, Ava. I shook my head. No. We did. He smiled, that quiet, steady smile that had become home to me. We stood there as the last trace of sunlight disappeared behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the sign. For the first time, I realized the name, Sunrise Oven, wasn't just about bread. It was about me, about what it meant to rise again. Warm and whole, that night, before I went to sleep. I opened my journal and wrote just one line. The warmth didn't leave when he did, it just took time to find its way back. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and let the sound of the lake lull me into peace. The morning light crept softly across the wooden floor, painting long streaks of gold on the walls of my little apartment above the bakery. The world was still quiet, no chatter, no footsteps, just the slow hum of the town waking up. I stretched, feeling the faint ache in my arms from kneading dough the night before. When I walked to the closet to grab my apron, something white caught my eye. It was wrapped in a plastic cover. Half hidden behind coats and scarves, the wedding dress. For a long time, I just stood there, staring. The lace had yellowed a little. The hem was still stained with dust from that day. I ran my hand along the fabric, and instead of pain, I felt peace. I remembered how it once represented everything I thought I wanted: love, belonging, a promise. Now it was just fabric. Soft. Silent. Harmless. I smiled, sitting down by the window. I pulled out my old leather-bound journal, the one I'd carried with me since Charleston. Its pages were filled with notes, recipes, and fragments of thoughts that had once kept me alive. On a blank page, I wrote slowly, Dylan didn't break me. He just broke the version of me who waited to be chosen. The ink bled slightly into the paper. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was closing a chapter, I was simply turning a page. Downstairs, the smell of yeast and butter was already floating up the stairs. I slipped on my apron, tied my hair up, and went down to open the shop. Outside, the horizon blushed pink and orange. A thin fog hung above the lake, and the first rays of sunlight danced across the glass windows of Sunrise Oven. I flipped the sign from closed to open. As the bell chimed softly, I whispered to myself, good morning. Not to the world, but to the woman I had finally become. The first customer of the day was Mrs. Eloise. She leaned on her cane, her silver hair shining under the morning light. Well, she said, sniffing the air. Smells like peace in here. I laughed. That's a new flavor I'm testing. She smiled knowingly. Don't change the recipe. Behind her, Cole came in carrying 2 bags of coffee beans. Morning, Ava, he said. The beans are from a new roast. Thought you might want to try them. Of course, I said, grinning. You're the reason I never run out of caffeine anymore. He leaned against the counter, eyes soft. And you're the reason this town smells like hope again. Eloise pretended to gag. Oh, for heaven's sake. If you two are going to flirt, at least do it after I've had my muffin. We all burst out laughing. For a moment, the bakery filled with warmth that had nothing to do with the ovens. As the day went on, more people came, fishermen from the docks, children running before school. An old couple who sat in the same corner every morning. Everyone left with something sweet and a smile. I realized then, Sunrise Oven wasn't just rebuilt, it had become a reflection of everything I had learned. Every loaf, every pastry, every laugh inside these walls carried a piece of my story: a loss, courage, renewal. Later that evening, after closing, I stood outside and looked at the sign once more. The gold letters gleamed faintly in the twilight: Sunrise Oven Bread, Coffee and Stories. My reflection merged with the letters. A woman who had once been broken, now standing tall in the light she created herself. I whispered, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure to whom. Maybe to the version of me who kept going when it hurt. Maybe to the universe that made room for new beginnings. That night, before bed, I left the wedding dress folded neatly on my chair. Tomorrow, I decided, I would donate it, not out of bitterness, but as a gift to another woman about to start her own story. I didn't need reminders anymore. My life itself was proof. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The world was still dark, but I could already smell the lake breeze mixing with flour. When I stepped downstairs, sunlight began to seep through the windows, soft, golden, tender. I opened the door wide, and the first beam of day spilled inside, catching the dust in the air, making it sparkle. For a brief moment, I stood there, bathed in that light, breathing in the scent of bread and beginnings, and as the bell above the door rang out, clear, bright, and certain, I smiled and whispered the words that had carried me through everything: sometimes life breaks you, just to let the real you rise, golden, warm, and whole.